Senate Democrats announcing an upcoming bill to counter China. What are the goals? Stopping the U.S. from serving as financial lifeblood for Beijing, shoring up America's key industries, and showing commitment to Taiwan. But there's even more to the story. A China competition bill passed last year is facing strong pushback.
This program is brought to you by Preserve Gold, the #1 precious metals IRA provider. Call 855-962-3322.
Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Before we dive into today's news, make sure to use the link below to subscribe to our newsletter. Each week, we'll round up the highlights and controversies happening around China and the world and share an exclusive behind-the-scenes snapshot with our readers. Keep an eye out. The newsletter will land in your inbox Friday morning. A new push to counter China. Senate Democrats announced that a new bill to bolster the U.S. against Chinese competition is in the works.
Time's not on our side. The Xi regime is working every day to catch up and surpass the United States.
Schumer saying the bill would focus on several areas, ultimately limiting advanced U.S. technology and investment from flowing into China.
It's incumbent on us to ensure that the U.S. is not the financial lifeblood supporting the Chinese government and its military technological advancement.
What's more, the bill also aims to fund key domestic industries like bioscience. It would also support allies so that America remains their preferred economic partner. That's to counter China's Belt and Road Initiative, a global investment project where China loans out billions of dollars to countries to build highways, railroads, and other framework. But Beijing often seizes those strategic assets, like seaports, after countries fail to pay back their debt. If passed, the upcoming bill would also reaffirm the U.S.'s commitment to Taiwan. Schumer said Senate Democrats have reached out to Republicans and that he hopes the bill would be ready in a few months. He noted that the CHIPS and Science Act passed last year built a strong foundation. That bill includes over $50 billion in subsidies to boost America's semiconductor production. The story doesn't end there, though. That subsidy comes with strings attached and is facing pushback from big industry players. The CHIPS Act requires companies to share part of their profits with the U.S. government if they received over $150 million in subsidies and made more money than expected.
Some of the conditions are unacceptable, and we would continue discussion with the U.S. government.
Liu said that those conditions could discourage chip makers from working with Washington to expand production in the U.S. A few South Korean microchip makers voiced similar concerns. TSMC looks to invest over $40 billion in 2 factories in Arizona. The U.S. Commerce Department said the profit-sharing requirement might be waived in exceptional circumstances. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo said the U.S. won't write blank checks to any company that asks. And on Capitol Hill, the Senate passed a bipartisan bill yesterday. It's designed to hold the Chinese Communist Party accountable for solar panel parts, often made with forced labor. But President Biden said earlier he would veto the bill. If he does, it could spell good news for Chinese companies. NTD's Melina Weiskup has the story on Capitol Hill.
So Democrats are split on this issue, but some are not shy in expressing their opposition to the White House. And we saw that with yesterday's vote, with a good handful of Democrats joining with the GOP on this vote. We'll get into the Democrats' response a bit later, but first I want to show you what Senator Rick Scott told me about why he prioritized pushing a vote on this. Watch.
These tariffs were created back in 2012 as a result of Chinese solar panel companies using slave labor, selling them in this country. They were dumping them on this economy to kill our jobs. On top of that, they were subsidized by the Chinese government. Now what we found is these same companies were sending, to get away from the tariffs, they're sending them down to Southeast Asia and shipping them here. The Biden Commerce Department caught them. Right? And then Biden says, oh, no, don't worry about that slave labor. Don't worry about them violating our laws. We're going to give them a 2-year reprieve. That's wrong.
Now, like I mentioned earlier, there are some Democrats who are aligning themselves with Senator Scott's position here because they say that waiving these tariffs undermines our human rights standards, but it also forces American solar panel manufacturers to compete with cheap slave labor from China. Now, other Democrats argue that American manufacturers would be burdened if these tariffs were reimposed. However, one Democrat Senator, Sherrod Brown, shared on the Senate floor ahead of yesterday's vote that he feels the exact opposite way. We'll show you what Senator Brown said, as well as an exchange I had with Senate Leader Chuck Schumer yesterday on this very issue.
In the end, it's a simple choice. Whose side are you on? Are you on the side of the Chinese Communist Party or the side of American workers? And that, to me, what this vote is about today, to continue these tariffs on China, because as long as they keep cheating, as long as American companies are willing to take the products from slave labor and underpaid labor and exploited labor and bring them into this country, these problems will continue for our industrial base.
Do you think it was a mistake for Biden to waive those tariffs?
No, the 2 years, look, either way, whether there's a 2-year extension or not, the chip manufacturing and battery manufacturing is flocking to the United States.
So as you just saw, Senate Leader Chuck Schumer kind of pivoted and avoided directly answering my question. And one reason why Democrats may be hesitant to speak out about this is because it does directly counter the White House's rule here. Now, the House has already passed a similar resolution overturning Biden's rule. So President Biden says he will veto this, in which case Congress will need to take action again, and more Democrats would need to jump ship in order to officially override the president's veto.
Now, the ball's in President Joe Biden's court. The White House has said he will veto the joint resolution, warning the tariffs would harm the solar installation market. If Biden does veto the measure, Chinese solar panels would have an easier time getting sold to the U.S. through other Asian countries. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says he hopes to reschedule a visit to China this year. He had originally planned to visit in February of this year. Here's his statement during an interview with the Washington Post.
You had a trip that was scheduled to China that you postponed because of the Chinese spy balloon. And I have to ask you, in a period where there seems to be some warming of relations between the United States, the beginning of a thaw, are you hopeful that you may be able to reschedule that trip this year?
I am, and I think it's important, as President Biden laid out in Bali when he was with President Xi at the end of last year, that we reestablish regular lines of communication at all levels and across our government.
Blinken reiterated that the U.S. is competing with China and that Washington is trying to make sure that competition doesn't veer into conflict.
And that starts with engagement. That starts with communicating. It starts with trying to make sure, again, that we don't veer into conflict.
Last month, the Financial Times reported that China refused to let Blinken visit Beijing over concerns that the FBI would release the results of an investigation into the Chinese spy balloon. Earlier this year, Blinken said he would pursue a visit to China when the conditions are right. The founder of the world's largest hedge fund warning that the United States and China are on the brink of war and past the point of discussion. Billionaire Ray Dalio made the remark last week after his recent trips to China. Dalio has a net worth of $19 billion. That's based on Forbes' estimate. In a LinkedIn post, he shared that he has been traveling to China for decades, but noted his 2 recent trips to China, lasting 13 days, have given him another perspective. During those visits, he met and spoke with people from a variety of backgrounds. Here's what his post covered. Dalio emphasized that the 2 countries are on the brink, but noted that doesn't mean they will necessarily go past that brink. He pointed out that the purpose of his memo was to describe what he believes to be true as accurately as he can without biased assessments of who is doing what right or wrong. He continued to say that his goal was simply to increase understanding to help minimize miscalculations. As for politics, Dalio stated the United States is not united and the Biden administration is not in control of dealing with China because the U.S. political decision-making system is fragmented. He also commented on the upcoming 2024 presidential election, saying the hawkish political influences in the United States will exert more pressure on the relationship over the next 18 months, and that will be a very risky period. Beyond that, he mentioned the possibility of yet another kind of conflict, writing that we are on the brink of an economic resources war. Such a battle would center around lithium, cobalt, and rare earths, plus the wafers and cells used in solar energy technology. All that said, Dalio noted he doesn't believe the Chinese Communist Party wants to go to war. He pointed out that in his view, China's reactions won't be strong enough to prompt a war in the near future, meaning the next few years. Dalio's opinion appears to echo sentiments in Taiwan. According to a recent survey, almost half of Taiwanese residents believe war with China within the next decade is unlikely. Just 34% said it is likely, while 19% stated they have no opinion on it. As Beijing cranks up its war propaganda against Taiwan, a trend on the opposite side seems to be creeping in at home. A recent anti-war post has taken Chinese social media by storm, striking a chord with numerous citizens. Here's a closer look.
The post reads, "If the war breaks out, I will not go, and I will not let my children go. I am a person who lives at the bottom of society. No one remembers us in times of peace. Only in times of difficulty do they just begin to think of us. They say that when the country is in trouble, everyone needs to fulfill their duty, but they are not giving us the same treatment when they receive benefits or enjoy national privileges." Social media users echoed a similar sentiment in their comments. One wrote, "The children and wives of high-ranking officials have all moved to the United States. Why should we, the common people, have to risk our lives to go to war for them?" Others suggested that city management personnel or other state officials should be sent to fight first. A China affairs commentator said the remarks indicate that Chinese people are waking up to the communist regime's dictatorial rule.
The country is under one-party rule. If they want to fight a war, go fight it. It has nothing to do with us, the people. How can we possibly die for the party when we are desperate for a strong external force to set us free?
Lai explained that if the state does not protect the people won't defend the state. He added a possible Chinese regime attack on Taiwan wouldn't present a just cause.
It's a blatant invasion. To fight this war in the name of protecting the nation is nothing less than bandits committing plunder and murder.
One internet user from mainland China said the regime has wrecked the economy and caused immense suffering.
Once they go to the front, people would either surrender or turn their guns around. That's why the Chinese communists don't dare to fight.
This isn't the first time anti-war sentiment has flared up in China. In February, an article posted the question, "If the motherland has the need, will you go to the front line?" Many commented, "Let the officials go first." Or, "If I get conscripted, I will rebel since I have a gun in my hand."
An urgent call for help from a Chinese NTD contributor. Zhou You hosts a military program for NTD's Chinese language channel. Zhou is calling on Beijing to release his father after he was sentenced to 8 years behind bars. His crime, practicing his spiritual belief Falun Gong. Here are the details.
Zhou You lives a double life, writing software code by day, hosting a Chinese military channel by night. And now he's taken on a third role, trying to rescue his father from a Chinese detention center an ocean away.
This is just unfair. This is outrageous. My father did nothing, but he will be in prison for 8 years. My father is already 62 years old. So when he is out, he will be almost 70. I don't know even when will be the next time I see my father.
2 weeks ago, Chinese authorities sentenced his father, Zhou Deyong, to 8 years in prison for practicing the spiritual meditation discipline Falun Gong. Falun Gong is based on the principles of truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. The meditation practice has been the target of a Beijing-run persecution campaign for over 2 decades. Millions of practitioners have been thrown in jail and tortured. At least 4,000 have been killed. An unclear number have had their organs harvested by force for sale in China's underground organ transplant market. His son believes Chinese authorities handed out the sentence because of his own influence. Zhou You hosts a top Chinese YouTube channel focusing on military and defense news.
I talk a lot about Taiwan, a lot about what happened in Ukraine, and it may also put me on their radar. And by sentencing my father is another way to punishing me.
Zhou's father has been detained for over 2 years. In 2021, police broke into his home and raided his property without a search warrant. Chinese police also denied Zhou's father's access to legal help.
So the next thing I do is I'm trying to call the local prosecutor's office. I'm telling them that I live in America and I already talked to my Congressman Billionaire, and my congressman has already written a letter to President Xi to inquire about my father's situation.
And it worked. Soon after, police officers allowed the lawyer to meet with Zhou's father. The man is now being held in a detention center, though his lawyer says his health is declining. As for Zhou himself, life hasn't been the same since his father was arrested.
What happened to my father put a lot of pressure on myself and on my family because your father is in prison. We don't know the well-being of him and we cannot talk to him. It has been 2 years and something worse, something bad might happen to him.
U.S. lawmakers have stepped in to help. 8 congressmen, including Florida Senator Marco Rubio and Rick Scott, sent U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken a letter urging the State Department to raise Zhou's father's case with Beijing. The State Department responded that officials would take the opportunity where appropriate to communicate with China. Zhou says he hopes the State Department will take action. NTD News, New York.
Time's almost up on Italy's partnership with China's Belt and Road Initiative, and a top Italian official says his country is unlikely to renew the deal, though he notes a formal decision would come only after the Group of 7 summit this month, hosted by Japan. Italy joined Beijing's far-reaching infrastructure project back in 2019. It's the only G7 nation to sign on. Opponents feared it would give Beijing control over the nation's critical infrastructure and open the door to intellectual property theft. But the nation's then leader saw it as an opportunity to boost the Italian economy. Though the deal appears to have had the opposite effect. Italian exports to China hit $18 billion in 2022, a rise of under $4 billion since signing the deal. But on the Chinese side, Chinese exports to Italy jumped over $28 billion in the same time frame, from nearly 35 in 2019 to a whopping 63 last year. The current Belt and Road Agreement ends in March 2024. Normally, it automatically renews. That's unless either China or Italy decides to back out. The senior official explained the uneven economic numbers would help argue the case not to renew. Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni's office declined to comment. That's all for today's China in Focus on YouTube. We're now sharing a shortened version of our program here after being demonetized for 2 years. Here's what to look out for in our second half. A tool designed as a helping hand, but now a possible double-edged sword. Imagine artificial intelligence bots like ChatGPT in the hands of an authoritarian regime like China. We spoke to Rex Lee, cybersecurity advisor at MySmart Privacy, to find out more on what that could mean. The full episode is available on our partner platform, Epoch TV. To sign up, click the link down below. Thanks for watching China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. See you tomorrow.